Greetings. You can sort of look at this video as a closing of the circle on the topic of female risk aversion. And I came across the idea of making this video basically as a result of a conversation I had with a friend about the Scottish referendum, which took place on September 18th, 2014. I had paid attention because I have spent quite a bit of time in Scotland in the past, traveled extensively, etc., and I'm pretty familiar with the history. And for those of you who don't know, the referendum was a vote taken in Scotland to vote if Scotland should secede from the United Kingdom. Probably the most important, at least symbolically speaking, political event that had taken place in well over 300 years since the Acts of Union in 1707, when the Scottish and English parliaments were officially joined, although nominally they had already been together since the accession of James of Scotland to the throne in 1603, in any event in the early 17th century. Neither here nor there. At the time, even though I paid attention to the overall results, I had not paid attention to the gender gap. And so out of a sort of mild curiosity, I decided to Google this. What are the results here? And the results were pretty interesting. And these were taken, what I'm going to read here was taken just a little bit before the, about a month or so prior to the actual vote. So links as usual in the bottom. Minding the Gap, Women's Views on Independence in 2014. As we enter the final weeks of the referendum campaign, persuading key groups of voters to back their cases becomes ever more important to both the Yes Scotland and Better Together campaign. Women are one such target group. In fact, some have suggested that women may, quote-unquote, hold the key to the outcome of September's vote. This is because women are less likely than men to say they will vote yes. Finding from ScotSend's 2014 Scottish Social Attitude Survey, SSA, released today at a conference in Edinburgh, underline this point. They show a 12 percentage point gap in the proportion of men and women who support independence. And here's where it gets interesting. We'll talk about that, but here's where it gets interesting. Of course, women are not a homogeneous group, and in fact, this quote-unquote gender gap is not apparent among all groups in society. In particular, there is no significant difference between the views of male and female graduates, that is, people who recently graduated from university, or between the views of men and women aged 65 and older, the age group least likely to support independence. The lack of gender gap among graduates in our latest survey appears to reflect a warming towards independence among women graduates since 2011. Now, the article goes on and on and on, links to this as well as another one on the topic in the low bar, but the beginning part, shouldn't surprise anyone. It is what I sort of hypothesized, and then, of course, when I actually looked up the data and the information, this is what was supported. Women were less likely to vote for an independent Scotland, a Scotland independent from the rest of the United Kingdom, than were men. Not tremendously so, but they were. What I think is illuminating and interesting is that the group, at least it's suggested here in the article, that is the group of women that is less likely to support it, is the group that falls into a certain age category, a certain bracket of time, biologically speaking, that's quite important to women. So we can surmise that a recent female graduate from university, say about 21, 22, or thereabouts in age, is not going to be terribly concerned with her biological clock just yet. She's going to be doughy-eyed towards the future, think there's some grand career plans in her life and how her life is going to take off, blah, 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 blah. And moving away from that group, as we move towards, say, the late 20s and early 30s, I think we can see a shift. This shift is, of course, a shift towards worrying about the biological clock, worrying about acquiring a partner, a mate, the security concerns, worrying once you have children, and we can get that in a bit. But, and I think this is actually mirrored to some extent by female mating rituals. You know, when you're a lot younger and you're, say, 20, in your early 20s, late teens, maybe mid-teens, women are keen to, vote to go out with cool guys, guitar players and guys with scruffy beards, but not necessarily resource-rich guys, just cool guys who have sort of group status as opposed to financial status. Not universally the case, but they're more willing to do that. And of course, their tastes change not literally, but seemingly as they get older and move towards the biological clock. And this seems to be roughly mirrored by this tendency described in the article. So I would say towards the late 20s onwards, all the way into the early 60s, perhaps late 50s, women are very concerned with questions of safety and security. And the Scottish polling on the question of Scottish independence seems to mirror this. Now, it makes sense that a woman who's looking to reproduce, find a partner, have offspring, so on and so forth, is going to be concerned with security because, well, that's her primary issue, to find someone who's willing to give her and the child resources so she can raise the child, so the child can pass on his or her own genes, etc. A little bit more curious, and not entirely, is the question of why, say, senior citizen women would not display a kind of gender gap. Well, it's actually not that mysterious. If you think about it, senior citizens, people, say, 65 and older, tend to be, well, pensioned. They tend to have financial resources. They tend to be living out their golden years. And so their retirement plans are in effect. They're less concerned about security in general, usually at least, if they're lucky, than are younger people, several decades younger. Pardon me. And this is particularly true of women. After all, presumably a 65-year-old woman or 66-year-old woman will reproduce, maybe had 2.5 children, had a husband who supported her, whatever. And this is all in the past. She doesn't need to have these concerns. So basically we're looking at about maybe 30, 35 years where the woman's concerns for safety and security are primary and tend to influence her voting patterns and her views on just about everything. Now, C.S. MGTOW had put out a recent video talking about women's aversion to the use of nuclear power, and I want to bring this up separately from an article, and this article was published in, well, 1989, so it's quite old. This is just the abstract. If you want to read the rest of the article, feel free to, though I think it's expensive. You might be able to get a free version. Article. Historically, women have been less likely than men to support nuclear energy. Following this literature, we hypothesize that this gender gap results from concerns over safety factors and or lower awareness of the issues. That's important. We studied the differences in perceptions between men and women towards the operation of a local nuclear plant during a wave of public protest. Our analysis should suggest that gender differences in safety concerns explain the gender gap in attitudes towards opening the local nuclear plant and provides a partial explanation of the gender gap in the perception of general nuclear power or technology. Awareness levels have no significant effect on the gender gap. We suggest that the gender gap can be traced to women's propensity to, and this is where I don't really agree with them, irrationally process negative information about nuclear power. Now, what this is telling us essentially, awareness levels have no significant effect. Women, and I pointed this out, they don't need to know the exact details about what is actually dangerous and what's not. It's all about perception. And I talked about this in Pumpkin Spice Latte. If you look at someone like a Food Babe that I mentioned, and she had her asshole torn a new one by I believe it's the Nerd Brigade, and she makes constant mistakes and further research on chemicals. Basically, her whole thing is there's a chemical in this food, and this chemical has some other application outside of food. Ban it, block it. She has no scientific understanding of these things. But if you stir up enough trouble and get worried, then you can get the sisterhood to join in, and everyone gets the product, or at least the ingredient, banned. This is essentially how the female mindset works. So it applies really across the board. To be fair, perception of danger is a human universal. It is true that women are much more likely to give voice to their perception of danger, the actual facts and the actual data notwithstanding. But perception of danger, for example, in the realm of flight, is something that's continuous. So people feel that flying, men and women, they probably more women, but they feel that flying is more dangerous than driving. So An article from USA Today. There are tons of these kinds of articles. You can check them out in the low bar. Basically says, look, people feel that flying is more dangerous, but what do the actual numbers tell us? So in the comparison section, in absolute numbers, driving is more dangerous, with more than 5 million accidents compared to 20 accidents in flying. A more direct comparison per 1 million miles pits driving 1.27 fatalities and 80 injuries against flying's lack of deaths and almost no injuries, which again shows air travel to be safer. Now, they conclude that people are it's all to do with the perception. Conclusion: statistically speaking, flying is far safer than driving. However, it may feel more dangerous because risk perception is based on more than facts, according to David Ropake, risk communication instructor at Harvard School of Public Health. Driving affords more personal control, making it feel safer. In addition, plane crashes are catastrophic, killing more people at once, which grabs more attention and makes people more sensitive to them. Car crashes happen every day and spread the loss over time, making their combined effects less noticeable. So this is, once again, another instance where I'm not a huge fan of flying. I think it's a necessary evil. You get on a plane, there's a shit ton of turbulence. It feels like shit. You're not in control. But even if there is an accident, you're unfortunate enough to die in that, you're one of the very few. Whereas car accidents, and I've been in 2 in my life, they are far, far more frequent. So perception does rule human consciousness. It's just that in the case of women, perception is arguably more important than the actual data. And the CS had pointed out in this video, nuclear power has a cleaner track record in terms of accident, safety, and lack of death than fossil fuel, than coal usage, for example. But once again, women, pardon me, my throat's a bit sore, women are averse to this because of their risk aversion. Now, this just covers pretty much the whole thing. This third video talked about the female risk aversion in pumpkin spice latte. I had an addendum, and this is just mentioning the division in the vote on the Scottish referendum with specific reference to that age group when women become very preoccupied with their biological clock and the necessity to secure resources from both the state and men. Now, in closing this video and closing this topic, I want to say that we've probably reached a point right now in our MGTOW anthology, if you wish to call it that, between various content producers across the internet, and particularly on YouTube, where we've actually assembled data and statistics and information. We know what's going on. The articles that get published that are expressing astonishment at women's tendencies in terms of voting and what have you, they're just that. They're astonishment because they either haven't invested the time and energy to understand, which I doubt, or they just, they're keeping hush-hush about it. We now know very well what motivates men and what motivates women in the voting bloc on issues of types of energy, and just about every area of life. We know that men and women are very different, particularly men and women of reproductive age onwards up until apparently they become senior citizens. And even then, I'm sure some differences persist. We know this. And so we have enough information collated, compiled, to very easily put the lid on the coffin of the many bogus claims that feminists make and just general public ignorance. But what's the actual obstacle here? People would say it's feminism and feminist ideology. But more and more, I'm getting the feeling that feminist ideology is nothing more than a kind of circumscription for what's become a cottage industry. It's just a way of making money. Anita Sarkeesian, I pointed out, she's not a feminist. In fact, there's some theories that her boyfriend that she latched onto, who comes from a lot of money, not her, but the boyfriend, is probably more of a feminist than she is. She's just a businesswoman, and a smart one at that. Keep on milking the product, feminism. Yes, there probably are some ideologically motivated feminists, but by and large, I think it's all about the money. So if this evidence would put the lid on the coffin to making lots of money, well, that's the problem. It's not just ideological rigidity and ideological resistance. It's also about the money, and I think increasingly more about the money than it is about pure ideology. So we are actually at the stage right now, through our combined efforts here on YouTube and elsewhere, to put that lid on the coffin. We know what motivates men. We know what motivates women. We've articulated it many different times. We've connected the dots and joined very different pieces of data to the same core driver in women and men, respectively. And this is ignored. It's ignored by feminist ideologues. And I would argue, even though MGTOW has been called ideological, and let's face it, there are some unpleasant MGTOW people, and some of them are ideological, it's ignored to some large extent by anti-feminists as well. Because just as feminism is a kind of cottage industry to make money, anti-feminism has become that too. There isn't a lot of rigor, intellectual or otherwise, in, well, looking at some feminist video and just and debunking the points. Some exceptions do exist. Most recently, I very much enjoyed Teal Deer's exposition on basically genetic material and heritability and how that all works with reference to hermaphroditism and so on and so forth. But Teal Deer is rare in this case, and I think actually I believe he's an actual scientist. But two sides of the same coin. As much as anti-feminists claim that they're interested in the truth, by and large, I suspect that when the feminist cottage industry shuts down, their industry shuts down too, and they have to find something new. So I don't think people are interested in the truth. Generally speaking, they're interested in the money, and I don't fault them. I don't fault them. But here on this channel, I have to persist in trying to address these issues as accurately as I can, whilst I certainly am helped very much by the money I make on this channel. I'm at the very least pleased that it's money made in an effort to actually understand the world as it is, and there are no actual limitations put on me in terms of political correctness and who I shouldn't offend. So anyway, that is closing up this topic. The next couple of videos will be on very different topics, I can promise you. And as always, thanks for watching, and enjoy your forthcoming weekend. Bye-bye.